I would say honestly, I just kind of went with the flow. Like I'm not gonna say that I wasn't like an oblivious kid, but like not my circus, not my monkeys type of kid. So I just know that I saw my mama work really, really hard. She was the nurturer. She was also the disciplinarian for most of my growing up. I don't think it switched until I got like into a teenager, and then like my dad kind of like stepped in to like guide me in a sense. I wouldn't say he was the best at guiding me because I mean once a hoe, always a hoe, and then here I am. It was just very much my mom was the cooker, the cleaner, got the kids ready. My dad was an amazing provider. He was kind of absent when it came to like monument. I'm not even gonna say monumental moments, but like those moments when like a girl really needs her dad, he wasn't really around because he was still in the streets hanging out and kicking and stuff like that. But like as far as like what I want in a husband, a lot of that comes from my dad of him being like a provider, a protector. He was very much, you're not gonna fuck with my family, you're not gonna fuck with my wife. That's like a zero tolerance type of thing. And I wanted a man kind of like that. And then me becoming the woman that I am is kind of a blend between like I wouldn't even say like my mom and dad. Like my mom is very like regimented. Make sure you do this. She gave me life lessons to go by, like words of encouragement, words of affirmation. But me being the Sagittarius queen that I am, I just kind of flowed the way I wanted. Yes, did I take heed to what she was saying, but also like she gave me the liberty to become my own person because she didn't have that liberty growing up. Like it was very, you live by the book, you die by the book, and you know God is always watching type of thing. Where with me, it was kind of like I kind of built my own roadmap to life, and the stuff that I realized, yes, I can now take those experiences and like turn it to God. But it wasn't beat it in me like a woman should be this and a woman should be this and a woman should be this. So I kind of like built my own blueprint, if that kind of makes sense.
And
Okay.
also, shout out to your mom because, like, to your point, I remember you saying that,
Shout out to Big Doug from Cell Block Man.
big up. Because I remember you saying that, like, because of how she was raised in the church, she was like, I don't want to do that to my kids.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And also, shout out to both of your parents because I remember a very notable quote from you when you were talking about your mom and your dad, and you grew up half holy, half ho.
Absolutely. I still stand by that to that day.
Love that.
To this day.
Yeah, the church I went to growing up, it was very progressive on that front, at least with regard to women in ministry. There were women pastors, women taught classes of men, women, and children alike. Um, yeah, it was kind of a thing that I didn't really think about because I just kind of assumed, oh yeah, this is how it is everywhere. My mom taught at the church, and my mom's a pastor. Uh, with regards to gender roles in the home, I don't think it challenged any of that, at least not explicitly, because there were a lot of very traditional family setups. There were like cases of abuses within traditional family setups that were uh, brushed over or quieted within the church. It was complex.
So I grew up in a pretty traditional conservative black church. And not necessarily conservative in terms of political views, and everyone in the church identified as a conservative. But the congregation that I went to, for the most part, it was an older congregation. People within the congregation did have children who did attend, but as they aged, they would also, not also, as they aged, they would leave the congregation. And so mostly the folks who went to my church were a lot of Gen Xers, boomers on back. And so a lot of what they held on to weren't doctrine that was scriptural, but more so things that were cultural and generational, especially seeing how it was a number of people who moved from down south up to the Midwest, up to Chicago. And that was very much reflected in their conversations and the way that they moved. When I think about gender roles within my church, it's what you would probably expect when it comes to a church. Only men were allowed to have the positions of leadership within the congregation. Only men were allowed to do the teaching if they were hitting the road to go to churches in other states to then preach and teach. It was always an all male crew. Women are usually allowed to serve on committees that are spearheaded by men, and in some instances, they're also allowed to read. So, traditionally, what you would expect within the church, men lead, women help and follow. And a lot of the sermons, even when it kind of discussed, even outside of church leadership, a lot of the sermons, when it talked about marriage, often did talk about marriage in a way that I feel like many of us are used to. You know, God is over everything. Man is the head of the household. A woman takes care of the house, leads, caretaking kids, all of that. At one point in time, and I think is very interesting, is that when a woman had her cycle, according to how they interpreted the scripture, a woman was then deemed unclean. So actually, in the church that I left, in the church history, there was a period of time where women were regulated to sit in different seats altogether in the church because they were on their cycle. And even a history of women who would just not go to church at all because they were on their cycle. Now they don't do the whole chair thing anymore. And as far as whether or not women go when they're in their cycle or not, I don't know. For a while, I was one of those people. If I was on my cycle, I wouldn't want to go. But if being completely honest with you, I can't say I wanted to go in the first place. And there's this quote from season one of Project Deconstruction that's my favorite. And it's an episode with JL. And one of the things that he said was, did I have a choice on going to church? No, I didn't have a choice on getting into Christianity. The choice I had was whether or not I was enthusiastic about it. And that just sums it up perfectly, because the choice to go to church wasn't mine. And so if I could use those moments to stay home, I was. I was. And I feel like growing up, I had my quiet rebellion, because I feel like when people talk about what it meant to be woman or wife within the church or within sermons, a lot of it was centered on what does it look like to be of service for someone else? And I wasn't interested in that, right? You go your whole life being a minor, being a child, and you have to exist under the rule of like your father in the household. And then when you get married, you're passed from father to husband, and then now you have to submit to somebody else. And then you have the kids. And I that's not a life that I at all like desired for myself. When I imagined my future, it didn't center a marriage, and it didn't center kids. And even when I would hear women growing up, both in the church and outside of the church, I just heard so many stories from women who wanted to do something different, or wanted to go to school, or wanted another career field, and felt like they never really had that opportunity to. And I just never wanted that to be my story.
In both Christian denominations that I was a part of, I'd say in both of them, they adhered pretty strictly to traditional gender roles, in terms of the wife is meant to be this submissive helper that like takes care of the kids and like does the cooking and the cleaning. And the husband is this head of the household type of role who is expected to be the primary financial breadwinner, even though that wasn't always the case. And they still expected that head of the household authority. But usually they were the financial breadwinner and the one who people looked at as the one to take responsibility for whatever was happening within their family. So I'd say, yeah, both of them were very traditional.
I would say they were pretty much for the most part reinforced. The stereotypical gender norms of like the man being the breadwinner, and the women like being the provider and caretaker of the home. It wasn't like necessarily framed as a negative thing, and I would like to preface by saying I personally don't think it's necessarily a negative thing to have like a traditional gender role if that's something that you want to do. I'm open to everybody just doing whatever the hell they want to do. I personally kind of like that sort of thing going on. It's not like a hard rule for me, but I would say in the church they more or less just kind of stuck to it and said like, yeah, you gotta man's got to take care of his wife, and then but the wife's got to take care of the husband. It's they framed it more as a partnership. Definitely, it wasn't like one like domineering over the other, but there it was definitely leaning more towards like a patriarchal household. But at least the pastor that we had, I felt he did like do his best to emphasize that like as much as like the man is supposed to be leading, like it's just as much his responsibility to make sure that the people in his household like feel looked after and all that. So I think it was a bit better than like the usual depiction.
It has their roles. Like the men were low key, the bigger part, the ones that are in charge of certain things, and the women were there to guide, just really to guide the entire process. Honestly, and I don't know the names of them. I forgot the names of them. I don't go to church like that, not at all. And then like, it was a pastor. It's primarily always a male, except there was one time where it was a woman, and the church had like a little issue with that. So that was like, okay, red flag number one. But it's very much the men were always the ones in charge of church.
The question, when it came to the women who teach, did women not often teach, or when they taught, was it like some type of like beef in a congregation? Like, what did that look like?
When they teach,
Or do lessons or sermons, whatever language
oh, there beef. I would say the only beef there was during Bible studies on Wednesdays. Yeah, spicy. But Bible studies on Wednesday, because they're always, it is not, it's not in the arguments like what I've seen as a child and as growing up. It was never really about church. It was more just about personal things. So not religion based at all, or more so wanting to have power over something, a certain aspect of Bible study, or even doing choir rehearsals. There's always beef there. There's always going to be beef in rehearsals.
What does that look like for you, especially with you being a musician, seeing that dynamic in church? What did that look like?
You see, back then I wasn't really involved in like playing the music. I mean, I did sit down a couple times, and but as a musically inclined little kid, seeing that I was just like, oh, they're arguing. Okay, about what? I didn't understand it at the time though. I didn't understand that at all because I was like, oh, they're arguing. My little kid brain's like, okay, they do this all the time. I'm used to it. But now, growing up, now looking back at it right now, I'm like, oh, they were actually arguing about being late, not learning the music. This should be right. The soprano should be singing this, all that other stuff. And it was more like, it wasn't no bad arguments. It was more just, typical arguments. But in terms of like outside of, choir rehearsals, like in church, like, during sermons, there are some stank faces that I have seen. There are some stank faces. Even as a child, I recognized a stank face. But I didn't really comment on it. It was just more like oh, this is what's going on. Okay. My little kid brain, I'm gonna just forget about it. They always argue anyways. But yeah, that's I think that answers questions.
So both religions were very traditional in their gender roles, which meant no, women were not able to take on actual leadership roles. So with my mom, her church, women were able to lead Sunday school or be teachers or be like on planning committees for events and things, but they certainly were not giving the Sunday sermon. They certainly were not making any executive decisions over the congregation or the church. And then with my dad's side of the family and their faith, women were able to take leadership roles within the ministry. They did not have Sunday school, so that wasn't an option. And they were able to similarly, join different planning committees and things like that for events or, remodeling or building like new churches and things like that. So they were able to do some small leadership roles, but like, again, same thing. They were certainly not giving the Sunday sermons or like making any executive decisions. So I'd say both were pretty similar.
I'm not gonna hold you. One of the things that did upset me when I was in church, that to this day still upsets me about church folks, and I feel like it shouldn't because it's none of my business, is that I feel like growing up, there were so many women who were content with the way things operated, with the sermons that were discussed, with being this secondary helpmeet role. And I'm not going to hold you, that really infuriated me. Even when it came to my church had a dress code. And a part of that dress code was that women couldn't wear pants. And so it was dresses or it was skirts. You couldn't do skirts, no pants, whatever. And then in addition to that, not always, women had to have their head covered once the actual lesson sermon started. Now, this was different at some of the other churches. We had churches in different states, but all under the same umbrella. And at different churches, women would have to wear headscarves from the second they walked into church. And all of these really did irritate me. Like, now, don't get me wrong, a part of me appreciated going to church and having the aspect to get somewhat dressed up, because on a day to day, I wasn't getting dressed up. So if it's a day for me to pop out and look good, I appreciated that. That's where I was trying new hairstyles. That's when I was trying new makeup looks. That was when I was trying new outfits. At least once I got to like high school and college, I was really experimenting. In elementary school, not really. I wasn't yet shopping for myself. I'll pick out things if I'm going out with my family, but in a sense of, oh, I'm going into stores, I'm going into thrift stores, and I'm picking this out. I wasn't doing all of that. And so a part of me appreciated the opportunity to get dressed up, but also part of me was just very upset that women had to wear the skirts and the dresses. And I remember asking people about the dress code. I was like, well, they do it this way over here, but this way over here, there's nowhere in the Bible that says women have to wear clothes. And even the people in the Bible, they was in there wearing skirts and stuff. So I don't understand this dress code, right? That was one of those things that is generational, that is cultural, but it's not scriptural. And anytime I would ask questions on that, it would always just come down to, well, that's the rules. Okay, and y'all are just so content with that. And a lot of them were. And I feel like that was something that was very hard to sit with after I deconstructed, because when I would talk to people about the reasons why I would left, they would be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And oh, yeah, I agree. And oh, I didn't like that either. Or I don't agree with this, that, and the third. I was like, so why has no one said anything and nobody did anything and nobody leaving? We're just here. But I feel like with a lot of the women who chose to serve, and that's not any shade to people who choose to serve, because I do still think that doing community service is a beautiful thing, they were just okay with that. There wasn't a lot of challenging. I do know the women in my family were and are a bit more outspoken when it comes to things that happen within church. So if it's something that happens that doesn't sit right with them, they'll say something. One of my family members noticed that on certain Facebook posts, if a woman would make a correction to a post that a man would make, her comments would be deleted, and she blasted that. But there wasn't a lot of direct challenging, which also is a part of the reason why I created Project Deconstruction, because let's have these conversations. Let's do the challenging. Let's talk about the things that don't make sense, that everybody knows don't make sense, but yet people choose to stay quiet.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, most of the ministries that were ran, or I believe that was the term for it, where they'll have like usually there'd be like a midway point between like the first and like second like session of it, because there'd be like an 8 to 12 and then like a 12 to 3, at or 8 to 11 and then a 12 to 3, and in that like 1 hour block there'd be like different ministries and like Bible classes and stuff like that, and almost all of them were led by women from what I remember. I think there were a few ministries that were like they had partnerships where like there would be a man and a woman teaching it, or sometimes just a man. But from what I remember, it was mostly women that led a lot of the ministries at that church that I went to.
It was I would say it's definitely formative. My mom was very more progressive than the church in that regard at home. Very much because I was homeschooled along with my younger sister growing up. So she taught us what gender roles were and why they didn't work. Um, but yeah, I grew up in a very I don't like the term progressive because that doesn't really mean anything, but I'll say a very gender progressive household. Um, my mom was my teacher most of my whole life, and I never really questioned women being in leadership roles, women having authority over men, any of that, because that's just what my life was like. It made sense.
I will say that I unfortunately was drinking the Kool-Aid for many years until I eventually left organized religion as a whole, still identifying as Christian, non-denominational, but just not having like a set church home to not have to be bothered with the politics and the often toxic culture within churches. So that was a side note. But I would say that when I was actively involved in congregations, whether as a young kid or as a teenager, young adult, I I was never fully 100% ingratiated in the mindset of men need to take the lead in all forms because that's the way God wanted it. And women are perpetually the helpers because that's the way God wanted it. I was always someone who was very smart, very career driven, very goal oriented. So I was never the person who would be 100% okay with just kind of like falling into that narrative and then letting a man, regardless of his qualifications, regardless of his financial ability to provide for us in the family, regardless of his level of education within that specific religion, like regardless of all these things, just because he is a man, he is the one to come in and be like, oh, you have to now submit to me in all areas. You have to let me take the lead over how's our family Bible study going? What are we going to pick? How often are we going to do it? Where are we going to live? How are we dividing the finances if we're dividing the finances? And like, what are we, spending money on? And just all of that. Like, I just never wanted to let a man have that level of control over me. But I was of the mind of like, okay, well, even though I know that I'm someone who's very driven and I know that I want a career, I guess I could basically shrink myself and allow a man to come in and be the head of the household as long as he takes my ideas into consideration, but I'm okay with not having final say. And I look back at that and I'm disgusted that I shrank myself to that degree when I was in my teenage years and in my early 20s with the mindset of it doesn't matter if I'm much more educated, make much more money, much more experienced in this area of life. None of that matters because he's the man. He has to have the final say. I hate that I fell into that, but
Woman.
I think it definitely did during my formative years for sure. Because I identified very heavily with the church as a kid. I would say it was a big part of my identity, and I felt like I based a lot of, I mean, as a lot of children do, I based a lot of my beliefs around what the adults in the church were telling me about. We never had like super deep conversations or anything, but I kind of just like emulated what I saw, which was just like the stereotypical like man leading the relationship type stuff, and the women being caregivers. And usually, well, I guess the example of like caregivers that I saw with that was like sometimes I do like the kids church that they had in the basement where they'd like have essentially just a different teaching, or they're usually just those older black ladies that'll have like peppermint in their purses. I hang out with them a lot. And they're always fun to talk to.
Those are my favorites.
Yeah, they're real sweet. I always like the green striped ones. Those are my favorite. I don't know if there's actually a difference in taste. Yeah, but the green striped ones were really good. I like those.
Yeah, that's when I really learned. I'm not gonna lie, growing up in a church and it seems like a really small thing. That's when I really learned the differences in candy. Because you got the spearmint mint,
Yeah.
and then you got the peppermint mints. And I like spearmint flavors, but I don't always like peppermint flavors.
Yeah.
But I also hate the peppermints. You know, the ones that dissolve in your mouth, the ones that are big and round. I don't
Yeah.
like those. And I learned through church that I do not like those.
That's where I learned that I actually really do like those. Like whenever a restaurant has those, like on your way out the door, I'd be grabbing like four of them bitches. I'm not gonna lie. I'd high key take the whole tray if I could. They're so good, man.
Yeah.
I love it.
See, I'm more of I like the green mints, and I really fuck with butterscotch, Werther's, and Jolly Ranchers. Not to get into like all of them, but like I do appreciate those old women with the church candies.
Yeah, butterscotch. My grandma put me on to toffee. Toffee's like one of my favorites. I don't get it very often, but when I do, man, it's ooh.
Top tier.
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you say gender roles? Do you think they impacted the dynamics you usually lean into in relationships? Do you find it to be like reflective? I know you said you personally appreciate the more traditional roles. So what does that look like for you in personal relationships?
Yeah. So for me personally, I like don't mind being like the sole breadwinner or like just being the primary provider, but I don't mean that in the sense that like my partner like isn't allowed to have a job, or like that I expect them to just sit around and just like be at the house all day. Like that's unreasonable. Like they're obviously free to like do whatever, but I don't mind being like the majority of the income, and then like or like they do like a majority of the housework, but I don't mean to frame it as like I'm not doing anything to help out, because I actually really love like cooking and stuff like that. So like I would of course help out with things like that, just doing just house chores in general. But for a while I was in a long-term relationship where that was sort of the dynamic we had, where I just was the primary income and they just took care of things around the house, and we both enjoyed what we did. it was very nice, and we still took time to like help each other out too as well. Well, I mostly just helped out around the house, which like not to say that I had an issue with her not working at the time, but I genuinely really love just like spending time with them, and just getting to really just be in your own space and like spending time with your partner and just like living life together. That's what I enjoy.
Women were always like in a little servitude position in the church. You know, during they cook, they sit there, they kind of low key manage things, while the men were, you know, always in suits, hands folded, being like security guards. Yes, and I'm like, okay, and I feel like they were more like security guards, honestly, and more to like guide the entire process, especially with passing the plate and everything like that. You know, what's it called, giving the money to the church. Um, that's what I thought about. Like, you know, women were in as a child, they were like in a servitude position. The men were just more like a, you know, macho security position. And now as I've grown up, I don't know, kind of like not really rework the entire you know positions, because I don't like that personally. I feel like anybody could be a in a position of security, male or woman, and it's like I get it in church because you know the Bible. They talk about that man, the head of the household, all that type of stuff. And then now we're in a day and age where women can become head of the household as well as do maintain certain roles as a male can. And so I'm like, yeah, you know, me, you do what you want to do. Honestly, do what you want to do. I don't care as long as you're happy. I'm happy. Um, but yeah, it's more like kind of got fed up with that thought process because it was very small brained to me. That's what I feel like. I call it small brained. It was very narrow minded as well. And so that's why I'm like, yo, do what makes you happy. I don't care what position you want to do. If you can do it, do it. I know you can. Go for it. But yeah, I think that's pretty much how it shaped me to this very day. Yeah.
When it comes to the expectations or societal expectations that we have for men and women or even in relationships, when you think about like you existing as a man in this world, when you think about relationships, do you find yourself doing things that are contrary to like what the expectations are growing up, or do you feel like you're more fluid in your expectations? I don't know if that question made sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. It's fluid with me. Like I said, a man can pay for a dinner, a woman can pay for a dinner, all that other stuff. Man can take care of a child, a woman can take care of a child. I say do what you want to do. Like I said, it's equal opportunity. We're out here. Go ahead to do what you want if you can do it. I don't care. For me, let's say I don't know. For me, like my dad told me, you know, be a man. You gotta pay for it. You know, the woman's me. You can't have no girlfriend without no money. And I'm like, oh, okay. And growing up, I'm like, you know, can I curse? No.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, fuck that. Fuck that mindset. Fuck that mindset. Because I'm like, I get it, but I'll be broke sometimes, you know. And and when I'm not gonna get treated, you know. But as I grew up, and you know, I started getting more money. I'm like, huh, I can actually afford to do this now. That's my broke mindset speaking. Anyways, yes, yes, I'll pay for XYZ. I like to be in a supportive position because I would like to have my friends, my family, my partners, platonic or whatever, romantic, to be supported, you know, by me, even if you know they may seem like they, you know, not asking for it. It's more like, yeah, here, this is me giving because I was taught to give thanks to my mom and my dad. But yeah,
So growing up, and I recognize that I was a bit, when I talk about it with my friends, I was the odd one out. But I'm someone who has never really romanticized or had a big goal set for myself to get married and to have kids. That was never something that was on my to do list, on my bucket list. And it wasn't any of those things that I was obsessed with. I feel like there are so many people around me who have dreamed of their wedding day, who know the dress, what type of ring, what type of cut they would like. And those are things that I honestly never gave much thought to until I was in a relationship with someone and they were asking me questions like, what type of ring would I like? Which was the first time I thought about that. And so growing up, it felt like a quiet rebellion to really prioritize myself in ways that I didn't see women doing, where I was thinking about what did I want to do with my time, what did I want my life to look like, what did I want my work to look like, and none of that involved kids or even a partner. And so that was my experience growing up. And that's something that carried into college, which I'm very happy that it did because I had a ball in college. Like that transition of coming into young adulthood, of coming into self, and coming into self on your own terms for me was a beautiful time. And I feel like since then, I just continued to get even deeper into that and what does that look like, and really exploring those parts of myself away from a lot of the control, fear, and shame that I feel like exist in churches often. Um, and I appreciate that. What I think is interesting when I reflect on how traditional gender roles are often enforced in church is even when it comes to people who are not religious, even whether that's men or women, even if they're not religious, I find it to be so fascinating when I feel like day to day folks who don't go to church, who aren't really attached to any type of doctrine, still hold on to these traditional gender roles where people have this idea men should do this and women should do this. And here are distinct roles that very much still give indoctrination, even if that person themselves isn't religious. And I think it's so fascinating because if you ask people if they're religious, they'll say no. But if you start to talk more deeply and specifically about what they believed in, it starts to sound real churchy. It starts to sound real churchy, and I just find that to be incredibly fascinating.